This episode is brought to you by State Farm. From your morning podcast to your afternoon playlist, State Farm knows you personalize your entire day, and that's why State Farm helps you personalize your insurance with the State Farm Personal Price Plan. It offers coverage options that help protect what you care about most at an affordable price just for you. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices vary by state. Options selected by customer. Availability and eligibility may vary.
Business taxes. Was stressing about all the time and all the money you spent on your taxes.
This is my bill?
Now Business Taxes is a TurboTax small business expert who does your taxes for you and offers year-round advice at no additional cost, so you can keep more money in your business. Now this is taxes. Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on turbotax.com/business. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service.
And I think that's the frustrating part too, is just my mom knowing all of this stuff, right? My mom approached me at my birth certificate father's funeral and said the most bizarre thing to me, and said, she's, first of all, never told me she loved me my whole life, and she chooses this to be the time. And walks up to me. I mean, we're standing there, it's like open casket still, everything's happening. And she's like, Kimmy, I know we don't get along very well, but I love you and you shouldn't have to be dealing with this. And I was like, well, that's an odd thing to say,
Yeah.
And so I think for me, a lot of that just lies within the lies that my mom kept, and watching me struggle with my abandonment issues with my birth certificate father. Like, I look at my own daughter and I would never want her to struggle in life in any way, shape, or form, and my mom watched that my entire life. I mean, basically, like, we all know what abandonment issues lead to, right? It leads to dating the wrong men. You're chasing people you shouldn't be chasing. It kind of just creates these crazy patterns. And I just wish she had, watching me go through all of this, took a step back and didn't think about herself in the moment, protecting herself, but protecting me as her child.
Welcome to DNA Surprises, a podcast that delves into the world of unexpected DNA discoveries. I'm your host, Alexis Auersalt. In July 2021, my life took a surprising turn when I found out that I'm an NPE, a person who has experienced a non-paternal event. In other words, my biological father isn't who I thought he was. Join me as we explore the stories of NPEs, adoptees, and donor-conceived people and their families. Get ready to unravel the astonishing journeys that begin with a simple DNA test. This is DNA Surprises. After 3 years of making this podcast and speaking to people who've experienced life-altering DNA surprises, I've noticed several trends. One trend is that oftentimes the biological father is someone a guest knew from childhood. Another trend is a tumultuous relationship with the mother. In this week's episode, Kim shares her emotional journey after discovering a family secret through genealogical research. She discusses the shock and clarity that came with this revelation, her strained relationship with her mother who kept the secret, and the dynamics with her siblings and other family members who knew the truth but were sworn to secrecy. Kim also speaks candidly about her efforts to build a relationship with her biological father, who she knew, and how the presence of this secret created issues throughout her life. Kim first told her story a few years ago on NPE Stories, hosted by Lily Wood. Her episode is linked in the show notes. Thank you, Kim, for sharing your story.
Kim, my age is 45, and I'm from Livingston, Montana. I discovered my DNA story about 4 years ago now. I would say probably May of 2020, so just after lockdown. And the reason I discovered it is just my love for genealogy and history. And so I did an ancestry DNA test 2 years before that, but I didn't really do anything with it. I didn't log into Ancestry or do anything with it really. And so when lockdown happened, I decided that I would take it a step further and do some family research. My grandmother on my birth certificate father's side was adopted, and I wanted to try to find the rest of her family. And that's kind of how I ended up down this rabbit hole of my DNA not matching with anyone else with the same last name as me. And I found that to be surprising. Along the way, what was interesting to me, I told my mom that I was doing this because I, wanted to find my grandmother's family. And she did tell me then that she didn't think it was a good idea and kind of became standoffish with me. And so I should have known at that time that there is something more to my DNA story, but I didn't think anything of it. And then over time, I was getting messages from people I was connecting with. These people, I didn't know their last names. They weren't familiar to me, asking how we might be related or where that connection is. And we went over both of our families' genealogy and just could not figure it out. And I did bring that up to my mom again. And she told me, I wouldn't want to find out any secrets. I said, I think I'm going to uncover a big secret here. Like, I think your dad had an affair. And I was all into it. I was like putting my investigator hat on and ready to dive in. And over time, I did start connecting with a last name that was familiar to me from my hometown. That was interesting to me. And I reached out to a person I know with that last name on Facebook. His name's Steven. And I sent a message and I said, hey, I'm noticing, I did an Ancestry DNA test and I'm noticing that I'm matching with people who have the same last name as you. And I said, do you think we're distant cousins or do you know how we might be related? And at that point, it was about 10 minutes later, I received a text from my mom who said she needed to talk to me. So he didn't write me back. And so I ended up going for a walk. It was during lockdown. So I just needed to get outside anyway. So I called my mom and she started crying immediately and just said, you're going to hate me. Steven called me after you reached out to him and asked me if you weren't aware that he was your real father.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I was just completely blown away. I think my initial reaction, actually, I started laughing because I didn't know. I think I started laughing for a few reasons. Like, I didn't really expect the news, but at the same time, it checked a lot of boxes for me and it made everything make sense.
It sounds like this blindsided you. You were like, I'm going to find out stuff about my mom. I'm going to, uncover other stuff. And then you find this out. It sounds like hindsight is 20/20 and things came into focus. What came into focus for you?
I think what really what came into focus for me was the fact that I'm the youngest of 6 kids and we all supposedly had the same father and he didn't want anything to do with me growing up. This was somebody that I struggled with. I had abandonment issues over this person. I went to therapy with those abandonment issues, just not understanding why my dad just really didn't take an interest in me after my parents got divorced. And I think that was something that immediately I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense to me now. And over time, as I learned more, I found out that he did know that I wasn't his biological daughter. And so he did put a lot of distance there with me. And unfortunately, as children, that impacts us greatly. And we take it on into our adulthood, right? I had some clarity around that and I was able to forgive him entirely. He'd already passed away by this point, but there was a sense of relief on that end, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Was your mom apologetic or what was the conversation with her like?
No, she was not. I mean, she still has yet to apologize. The conversation with her was really around her, how she was in an unhappy relationship and basically placing blame on my birth certificate father. I think she hid it all these years and wanted it to remain that way because of the shame, right, that she was feeling.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I learned that my biological dad was someone she was in love with, and he didn't love her back. They had a brief affair, and then she got divorced from my birth certificate father when I was 11 months old. I think there was probably some conversation. According to my bio dad, there was some conversation after the fact about moving their relationship forward, and he didn't have the same feelings for her. He did offer to help take care of me, but she said no. I think at that point in time, she just decided she was going to keep it a secret forever and ever and take it to the grave with her, But at the same time, she didn't realize there were many people who knew. So over time, with having 6 siblings, I found out that my oldest 3 siblings all knew. That's news as well.
How did you find that out?
I found it out by bringing my news to them, like my discovery. Those 3 oldest siblings just came straight forward with me and said they always knew. They definitely wanted to protect me in the best way they could. I don't think they knew how. They were all in high school and younger when this occurred. And one of my brothers ultimately moved out and moved in with their dad because they were upset with our mom about it. And, I think that's something my mom doesn't realize is how much the secret impacted everyone and not just her, right? And so over time, they opened up about it to me. My sister told me she found a letter that my mom had written my bio dad, laying it all out there. And she confronted, my sister was 16 at the time, and she confronted my mom, and my mom swore her to secrecy. And that's something, I brought up to my mom, and my mom doesn't remember that. Or so she says, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you've heard this interviewing the number of people you have is the mothers in the situation. A lot of them can be narcissistic, or you uncover the true narcissism that exists there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I've learned about my mom. I always knew it to some extent, but once the secret was uncovered, it became more exhausting to have conversations with her about it because she made it all about her. And she's the victim in this. I don't think I'm ever going to get an apology, and I don't know that I need one.
What do you do to get to that place of closure?
I started reading. I found this great book that was called, I think it's Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents.
Mm-hmm. It's a good book.
And I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yes.
Yeah. And it just really helped me understand my mom being this complex character that she is. My relationship is not great with my mom to this day. I'm just in a better place mentally where I'm not questioning every day. Like when I first discovered it was constantly on my brain, I feel like, and wanting to get to the bottom of it with her. Like I was really like, we're going to talk about this, and she wasn't going to, and she wasn't going to take ownership of her actions. When you're learning about narcissistic parents over time, like you realize like you're just not going to get that apology that you're hoping for. So
yeah,
I've just been able to cope with it that way. And it's also just knowing that I'm not going to has helped me create better boundaries with her because I know what kind of person I am and I know what kind of person she is. People always say this, right? Like, your mom's still your mom, or like, wow, I can't imagine what she went through back then. I get that a lot from people, which is interesting. In those days, divorce wasn't a thing or, it's just honestly helped me create boundaries with her that I needed to probably create long before this discovery. Even growing up, she was not nice to me. And like we talked about in the beginning here, finding this out, just, checking some boxes for me, that was one of them. My mom would say incredibly mean things to me, like how I wasn't wanted or, just very weird jealousy things with me my entire life and never happy for me, right? Like, It's almost like she didn't want to see me succeed in life.
Mm-hmm.
So once you find out something like this, and if you're going through struggles with your mom like that, finding out a discovery like this can be pretty eye-opening to why they treated you so poorly growing up.
What does your relationship look like with your mom now? You've talked about boundaries. Do you keep her at like arm's length? Do you talk to her often? What does your relationship look like?
Yeah, it's been a bit difficult just because My stepdad had a stroke last year. And ultimately, I ended up being someone who was taking care of him and getting him set up in hospice and that sort of thing. So, I had to talk to my mom quite a bit, obviously, during all of that. And it wasn't easy because she just is not an easy person. I mean, she's not an even keel. Like she's either at a 0 or she's at a 85. And especially under something so stressful like that. And so I think for me, it's just she wants a reaction a lot of the time from any of her texts. She feels like I haven't reached out in a while. I'll get a mean text. Well, I just don't text back, right? I don't play into whatever tactic it is that she's trying to use to get my attention. And she'll do that. I mean, she posts passive aggressive things on Facebook. And so for me, it's just not responding. And I just won't call her for weeks at a time. And she's behaving that way. And she kind of will come around and be like, you're right. I haven't been in the best mindset. But at the same time, she's elderly. And I feel like as the youngest, I'm stepping up a lot just to make sure she's taken care of. So, though I have those boundaries, it is difficult, to manage at times. But, I think just protecting your peace means so much in these situations because she hasn't apologized. Like, I don't feel like I owe her anything. The things that I'm doing for her are just because of the person I am, and I want to be doing them right.
Thank you for talking about that because it's really important.
And also just something I feel like we're just recommending this book to everyone to read. But, they talk about how, emotionally, if people have something traumatic in their life, right, happen, that's typically like around the time that they stop maturing emotionally wise, right? And so my mom, when I'm dealing with her, it truly is like she's a 17-year-old petty high school girl. It's not an easy conversation when you want to have some depth to it because she feels attacked and she's just not capable emotionally, or her maturity level is just not there still at 80 years old, right? And that's the hardest part is because I really at first, I really just wanted to sit down and hash this out and talk about everything. I wanted to know everything and she just wasn't capable of doing that and still isn't. I mean, if I were to talk about it with her today, I mean, she's going to say the same thing and she's going to blame my birth certificate father for cheating on her all those years, even though, she obviously cheated as well, but she was not the bad guy in the situation. It was him. And that's honestly all I get. So it's not an apology. It's just so-and-so pushed me to this.
Yeah.
But keeping it a secret, I truly don't think she understands that impact because it's also, I'm from a smaller town. It gets even better, right? Because my bio dad ended up marrying one of her best friends later in life who, when my mom retired, she went and worked at her jewelry store alongside with her. And her brother was my godfather. And I found out all those people knew, right? Yeah. But the fact that my mom, there's, to me, and now that when I look back on it, I find it so odd that she was so close to my bio dad's wife and helped her through, I mean, she had pancreatic cancer and ended up passing away and was there for her the whole time and around my bio dad all the time. And I just think how bizarre that that was happening, but you knew this person was my biological dad.
Yeah.
And I remember him being around my whole life.
What has happened there with the newfound family? It's been a few years now.
We met up in person once and it was, that was great. I feel like I'm kind of the one, probably trying to build a relationship or keep a relationship moving. He does reach out to me on holidays, messages me. He wants me to call him dad. When we first met up in person, he did tell me, it's well, I want you to know that I love you, and I think this is what I tell people about that. It's it's almost like when you're on a first date and you're just getting love bombed by someone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're whoa, slow down, right? I was but.
And he had known your whole life.
Yeah. He had known my whole life.
And so for him, maybe it's this pent up excitement. But I'm curious, What did he really have to say about the fact that he did know for so long? I know obviously it didn't work out with your mom. He wasn't interested in a relationship there, but what did he have to say about his absence as a father in your life?
Ever since he got back from Vietnam, he told me he was not in a good place at that time when this affair happened with my mom, because he worked with my birth certificate father and they were friends. And he just keeps saying, I was not a good person back then. He said, but I did offer to be there for you and to financially, take care of you. And your mom just said, no, my birth certificate father was just going to take me on as his own, which probably because she didn't tell him. But, I think he probably would have had my mom not wanted to keep it a secret. But the whole reason behind that was she just didn't want to be outed. I don't think she realized, though, my birth certificate father did know. I mean, he had a vasectomy after my last brother, who was like a year and a half older than me. And, my mom said, oh, the doctor said it can happen. And I was with my birth certificate father when he was passing away in hospice. And, at this time didn't know any of this, but he did try telling me something when he was, at that time, wasn't verbal and could barely talk, but he pulled me to him and was trying to say something. And the siblings that knew, later now in life have told me that they knew he was trying to tell me the truth. And so, I don't know. I wish my mom would have let my bio dad step in and try to be a part of my life, because I think it just would have saved a lot of heartache in the future for not only myself, but, my birth certificate father. And my siblings, and I, again, don't think she realized the impact that it had on so many. But, when I first met up with my bio dad, he did ask me, he was like, what do you want from me? I don't have any money.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And I was like, no, that's not at all why. And again, once you read that book, I can look at him too and see he definitely went through his traumatic experience, whether it was Vietnam. And so he has like the same maturity level as my mom, which is really interesting.
Where are things at a few years in? Because I think a lot of people, they have that initial burst of excitement. You kind of talked about like maybe some love bombing kind of thing going on where it's just super, I want to get to know you and let's make up for all the lost time and all of that. And then now you're a few years out. What does it look like today?
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it. Guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Today, it just looks like just a lot of Facebook messages and, just banter on Facebook. I've reached out to aunts and uncles, so his siblings, who I'm connecting with, and I'm actually planning to travel to Arizona to see one of his brothers this next year, who's been great. He's been so open about it, and I'm going to go meet them.
That's exciting.
So, yeah. We just had that conversation, so there's no plans set in place, but we're really hoping to get together. But you mourn like missing out on not knowing who your true family is, biological family. And I do think that's something that I've dealt with. I don't know if you had a similar situation or if you're connected with all of your bio family now, but I think you just wonder like, who am I? Who do I look like? And that's something I still do, right? Like I constantly want to dive through Facebook photos of his siblings and just see if I can see any old pictures of like my grandma I never got to meet, So it's really interesting. And I don't look like any of my siblings. And so it makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now too. So
speaking of your siblings, I mean, they carried that burden. They carried the weight of the secret for a very long time. And you've talked about how it affected them having to keep that secret to the point where some of them didn't even want to really be around your mom for a period of time. What is your relationship like with them now? And what is the family dynamic like with your mom and them and everyone?
With my siblings, for the most part, we all get along really well. Definitely, I think it brought us closer in ways. But one particular sibling who, when I told him I was doing the ancestry test, like he did say a few things that made me think, like, he would always just tell me, it's like, I just want you to know, like, you belong here. Like, you belong here. And he would always say that to me. I was like, well, thank you. Like, thank you. I am glad I'm here. He knew I was going to find out someday. Do I wish he told me directly? Probably. But at the same time, I learned how much it impacted him because he hated my mom for what she did and cheating on his dad, right? He was very, very close to my birth certificate father. And I think he definitely had some mom issues and still does to some extent with that. And my siblings too. I mean, my sister, I think for her to be sworn to secrecy at 16, she got married very early. She was married and moved out of the house by 18 because she said it was just too toxic to be there with my mom. It sounded like my mom, after that, became quite a partier and would force my sister to babysit my brother and I. And so, for her to have that knowledge and then see my mom just kind of like partying all the time and not really taking an interest in me or my next closest sibling was really frustrating for her. And then when I ultimately ended up having my own daughter, my sister told me at that time she thought about talking to my mom and telling her that she needed to tell me the truth. My daughter has my last name now because I raised her as a single mom, and that last name that we carry is my birth certificate father's. And so I think my sister was like hoping my mom would be truthful at that time, and she didn't say anything.
How do you feel about that, carrying that name? And have you felt any like desire to correct your birth certificate or your name or anything like that?
Yeah, I have. I mean, my daughter and I both joke about it, like coming up with our own new last name. And it is something I think about. I don't know that I want to change it to my bio dad's either. I don't know how I feel about that. But it does feel weird to carry a name of someone who wasn't your father. And then I found out most of his family knew too, right?
Yeah. Can you talk about that feeling? I've talked to a few people on the podcast now who have had to reckon with the idea that basically everyone in their lives knew except them.
Yes.
What did that feel like and how did that affect you?
I don't live in Livingston anymore, but I live like 25 miles away, and I don't like going back to my hometown. There's something about it with all of the people finding out that knew. It's hard to discover that you were a secret that you didn't even know about, right? Like you kind of just go through your past and in your mind. It's just it's almost like an out of body experience, right?
Yeah.
You're kind of just like step away from it all, and you're just like, so weird that I was like this secret that most everyone knew about. And I was like, you almost feel like the butt of a joke.
Yeah.
And it's also, now that people know, or I know they know on both sides, I get approached like at my stepfather's funeral a few months ago. Some of the people on my birth certificate father's side, cousins pulled me aside and they're like, we understand now, and we just want you to know, like, you'll always be our cousin. You're always part of our family. And that to me almost is like, I would rather them not approach me.
Yeah.
And say that. Do you know what I mean? Because it's just,
like a reminder that they knew and you didn't or something.
It is. And also like, it's not that easy to just, I think when I first started telling people my story, they were like, oh, well, it's not a big deal. Like, you'll always be I'm not going to say my last name because, for privacy purposes. I think people say that a lot to those who are in this situation is, oh, well, you're always going to be their sister. You're always going to be their cousin. You're always going to be their daughter or whatever the case may be. And it's easier said than done when you discover this. I'm sure over time it gets better. And it has for me. I don't think people understand that it is all different now, right?
Yeah.
Like you go back and question your entire life and your entire personality and who you are as a person. And it's just, it's not as easy. I don't know, to just move forward and act like nothing happened, but you're still going to be family with everyone who you thought was your family, right? There's more to it. Yeah.
How would you compare the first time you went on a podcast with Lily and you shared your story and it was much more fresh at that time? Now you've had some space. What would you say is different, or how are you doing compared to that time?
I've just kind of now come to terms with the fact that, my mom's not going to ever apologize to me. So I would say in that way, like things have gotten better, but I feel like I went from one abandonment issue to another.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like I'm the one trying to create a relationship with my bio dad. And though he is like engaging and whatnot, I mean, he's older too. So, and he's not very healthy. And so I think that's part of not being able to get together. But I know he goes and he plays bingo. My daughter plays bingo every Wednesday in our hometown, and he does too. And they sit literally like back to back. And she's super shy anyways, but like he is too. And he's never approached her. Where to me, it's like that could be an easy way to build a relationship. I mean, seeing each other as often as they do. And so, I think I was hoping for more out of a relationship there. And that's okay. I mean, it's probably not going to happen. I'd like to see old pictures of family members. Like I said, I love history and genealogy. So a lot of what I've been doing is just like finding out stuff on my own on that side of the family, utilizing Ancestry, and then his siblings, right? I think probably back when I was on Lily's podcast, I thought I would be further along in a relationship with him at this point.
Do you feel like you've made peace with the lack of connection there, or is it something that you're still hoping for?
I think I've made peace with it. And I think a lot of that comes from, my stepdad was my dad. He married my mom when I was 2. I don't even know if he knows this DNA story. I have a feeling he doesn't or never did because like I said, my mom didn't want anyone to know. But again, I don't think he would have told me, but he was so special to me. And, I was with him at the end and, we had some special time together. I think just realizing who's important in your life versus trying to chase that false hope, I guess, having that false hope that you're going to reconnect with your bio dad and just realizing like my stepdad was my dad. I think that's helped me immensely, and having that special bond with him.
Yeah.
It definitely has brought me some peace.
So many of our stories have these unanswered questions we will never be able to ask or maybe trust the answers for. Do you have any of those as it relates to your story?
I'm sure I do.
Yeah.
I do question why my bio dad, knowing me as long as he did my entire life, seeing me grow up in front of him, why he didn't make a bigger effort. And, his wife, who I knew very well, he told me that she knew, and it was a point of contention in their marriage. And, I do kind of wish that like somebody just spoke up. And I grieve not meeting, a grandma who sounds amazing, and I think there's grief there in that because she was alive up until I think she passed away when I was in my late 20s. And for my daughter, and I think one of the other biggest things, right, is our genetic health. My birth certificate father passed away from cancer, and there's a lot of cancer on his side of the family. And my sister's currently battling cancer, sadly, right now. And every time I went to the doctor, like, it was on my chart all over, just my cancer history. But that wasn't my history. So when I found out my bio dad's history, there's no cancer on his side, and so, I think just for those purposes too, for people to know their genetic health. And now I understand like some of my own health issues, right? Around like early arthritis and things like that, like definitely coming from my bio dad. And I think that's the frustrating part too, is just my mom knowing all of this stuff, right? My mom approached me at my birth certificate father's funeral and said the most bizarre thing to me, and said, she's, first of all, never told me she loved me my whole life, and she chooses this to be the time. And walks up to me. I mean, we're standing there, it's like open casket still, everything's happening. And she's like, oh, Kimmy, I know we don't get along very well, but I love you and you shouldn't have to be dealing with this. And I was like, well, that's an odd thing to say,
Yeah.
And so I think for me, a lot of that just lies within the lies that my mom kept. And watching me struggle with my abandonment issues with my birth certificate father, like I look at my own daughter and I would never want her to struggle in life in any way, shape or form, and my mom watched that my entire life. I mean, basically like, we all know what abandonment issues lead to, right? It leads to dating the wrong men. You're chasing people you shouldn't be chasing. It kind of just creates these crazy patterns. And I just wish she had like watching me go through all of this, like took a step back and didn't think about herself in the moment and protecting herself, but protecting me as her child,
Yeah. What advice do you have for a parent who may be keeping a DNA surprise from their child?
As hard as it is probably for them to tell the truth, it's the best thing they can do for their children and their loved ones. I know it's hard to feel that shame or let that shame out. And also like I have a feeling that telling the truth is going to set them free. So that's my advice there.
Yeah. And what advice do you have for someone who just uncovered a DNA surprise?
Yeah, it's okay to feel the feelings and you're probably going to feel like you're in an out of body experience a little bit, like you're not yourself. You don't know who you are. There's like an identity shift. And I experienced that on many levels. It's just a reminder, like it's okay to feel the feelings that you're feeling because it is complicated and it's scary and it's hurtful and it's all those things. But again, just leaning in on, the MPE network that exists and connecting with people and just having conversations around it can be incredibly helpful for moving forward.
Kim, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I really appreciate you sharing your story, and I will be sure to link your NPE Stories episode in the show notes for people to listen to. But it's so good to kind of check in with people and hear how they're doing after a few years. So I hope that things continue moving in a positive direction and that you keep those boundaries going. And I just wish you the best.
Oh, thank you so much, Alexis. It was great to meet with you today. And, thanks for doing this again, holding space for others to tell their story.
Thanks again to Kim for sharing her story. If you have a DNA surprise that you'd like to share, please submit your story at dnasurprises.com. Until next time, this episode of DNA Surprises was hosted, produced, and edited by me, Alexis Auersalt. It was mixed and mastered by Josh Auersalt of Siren Recording Studios.